Boa tarde. That's good afternoon in Brazilian Portuguese, apparently. So boa to all you tards out there, and welcome to the Fights Gone By podcast. I'm your boy Jack Slack, and if you're listening to this, the chances are that you're not looking for an in-depth recap of all the excitement that happened at UFC Brazil. You're probably here because you want to hear me moan about it, because I didn't even I did about 10 minutes of coverage of it on the previous podcast, but I did an Ask Me Anything on the podcast instead, because I said this event was going to be shite. I said there are a lot of shite matchups and a ton of shite fighters on this card. People got really upset about it. Well, a couple of people got really upset about it, and then it was shite. So, there we go. The fact that I didn't bother even covering it was somewhat vindicated. I mean, I can't pick fights, but I can tell you when an event's going to be shite, probably. If only you could bet on that. So, straight off the bat, let's talk main event, because nothing fucking happened. The most exciting thing that happened was in round 5. Jacare slipped when he got punched, and we all went, oh, knockdown, and then they all went, oh no, it wasn't really a knockdown, he sort of slipped. It was basically Jacare, right from the get-go, dived on a long, low shot, because he doesn't really have setups for his takedowns, which meant that he just pushed Blachowicz to the fence, and the entire fight was spent along the fence. The striking was overwhelmingly Blachowicz, but that was mainly because of activity. Let's have a look at the fight metric stats quickly. Okay, so he landed at 41% and Jacare landed at 41%, but Jacare threw less than 50 strikes. That's why he lost that one. And 0 of 5 takedowns attempted. Now, you'll remember that he pushed him to the fence in every round, so I'm going to assume each round was a takedown attempt. Just a terrible, terrible fight. And really discouraging if you're a Jacare Souza fan, because he's just run out of ideas, really. He never really got past the sort of dive on the leg and just come up explosively sort of takedowns. He did do a jumping leg reap against Kelvin Gastelum, but, always flat-footed, not a terrific ring cutter a lot of the time, and just really not the kind of guy to take you down with a ton of chain takedown attempts off the fence. Just a guy to sort of lean on you and stamp on your feet if he can't get you down. And Blachowicz continue being Blachowicz, awkward and good, but in a way that you can't actually enjoy. So that was that fight. I feel like we should try and splice them up a bit so that we're doing a good one and then a bad one. I skipped some of these. Douglas Silva de Andrade, or Douglas Andrade, as he's listed as on a lot of these sites, versus Renan Barão. This one was kind of sad, but it was quite cool to see de Andrade back in his element, because he hadn't fought since he fought Petr Yan, and Petr Yan beat the brakes off him back in... Bloody hell, that was 2018. That was almost a year ago. Done nothing since then. And most recent win was Marlon Vera, which is a good win, because we're super on the Marlon Chito Vera train on this podcast, but that was back in February of 2018. So coming up on 2 years since that. What is with his incredibly low rate of activity? That's really strange. He fought February 2015, November 2016, July 2017, February 2018. That is a really inactive fighter. But always been sort of highly regarded. It turns up in the rankings quite a bit. This one really just hammered home to me how done Renan Barão is. The guy looked... I can understand later when he was looking really uncomfortable and almost scared, because he had a massive cut that had opened up. And basically at that point, I mean, if you saw Inoue versus Donaire the other weekend, I'm going to get that in now, I'm going to talk about that, but Donaire snapped his head back with a left hook, and he caught him right on the eyelid, and he opened up a cut, and I think that was first round, second round. But the next round, Inoue, who is normally just fearless and the bully in a lot of his matches, came out with his hand nailed to the cut, and he looked really quite concerned, because at that point Donaire doesn't even have to hit him; he just has to keep slapping his eyelid with a flicking jab, and then the fight's done. Fortunately, his corner did a good job of getting the cut under control, and then Inoue could get a bit more comfortable through the following rounds. But the cut in this one was gross, right above the right eye. What, right eye? No, left eye, because it was Andrade's right hand and elbow that opened it up. He was throwing naked right elbows and smashing Barão over the head. Barão looked as bad as ever. I mean, he ducked in on a nice takedown in the first round, because the problem with Barrow's takedown attempts was, and Barrow, like a lot of people, when they're bigging me up in fights on Reddit and so on, they like to say like, oh, he called exactly how Ronda Rousey and Henan Barrow and people like that would lose, and I'll take the Ronda Rousey one, but Henan Barrow had a very rigid set of abilities. And I mean, the feinting and the throwing off the counter and things like that was stuff that no one was really talking about. But one of the things that was really obvious was that when he gets a bit frustrated, he shoots a takedown by ducking his head and just running in. Doesn't really have like a good shot or a level change. So Andrade hit him with some nice body shots during those. But in the first round, Barrow takes him down, gets top side control, and then he did the Bibiano Fernandez. He just held it and didn't do anything. So the ref stood him up, and then he was knackered already by like the midpoint of the first round and just getting beaten on. Really nice entry from Andrade at one point where Andrade, whatever you want to call him, at one point where he threw a right front kick to like the chest or face and forced Barrow back onto the fence, stepped in, so shifted on the kick to throw a left uppercut and then flurry off that. Worked really well. Those right kicks into shifting left blows, big favourite of Robert Whittaker. But yeah, every time Barrow got top position, I think it only happened like twice in this fight, but he just held the top of half guard and did nothing. It was very clear that he was like, oh, thank God we're on the ground now, better not lose it. Andrade always looks like he started his run as the deprived class in Dark Souls. He's just got no fat on him, absolutely shredded, also looks kind of gaunt the entire time. But yeah, I thought it was a good showing at him. Battered Henan Barrow. Great heart from Barrow, but he is so clearly done unless he changes something. And was he back up at? Yeah, he was back up at featherweight for this one. So yeah, not encouraging at all, because he was already struggling to make bantamweight, and that was part of the thing that everyone blamed for his big decline. The just brutal weight cuts he was doing. Yeah, really sad. Wally Alvarez versus Randy Brown was weird, but then what Randy Brown fight isn't weird? Wally Alvarez takes it, gets top position, doesn't do much with it. Second round, Randy Brown teeps him in the junk, teeps him right in the cup. Wally Alvarez falls over, gets up, waits a bit too long, and then goes, oh, he kicked me in the junk, by the way. And as he's doing that, Randy Brown flying knees him in the head. Wally Alvarez is sort of like dazed, takes him down, gets triangle choked. Pretty funny, but still, kind of unfortunate. The James Krause, which you can't say without sounding like sarcastic. The James Krause? James Krause, the wrestling coach of Megan Anderson? No, he turned up for a fight with Sergio Moraes, got taken down immediately, kept everything tight. Sergio Moraes had side control and was trying to dig out the inside elbow so that he could mount or go for a DAS or something like that. And completely failed. And James Krause is doing the big eyes and, he's not doing anything, ref. He's not doing anything. And you're like, you're in bottom side control under a Brazilian in Brazil with a Brazilian referee. What did you think was going to happen? But eventually gets back up, and Moraes was completely gassed from holding the top of side control. Truly amazing. Just kept looking for like moments to touch gloves and jogging around the cage and trying to get a break, and Krause just followed him, jabbed his face off, beat him up, and then knocked him out. It was a good performance from James Krause, but Sergio Moraes, as good as he is on the ground, that is exactly how bad he is on the feet, to paraphrase that old football commentary thing. Just dreadful. That's the third in a row, I think he has been beaten up on the feet. Anthony Rocco Martin, Wally Alvarez, and James Krause. And Kamaru Usman starched him as well, remember that. 3 losses back-to-back, wouldn't be unusual if he got cut. What else did I watch on here? Did not give a shit about Wellington Truman versus Marcus Perez. I watched it, but it was just like, what's going on here? Charles Oliveira versus Jared Gordon. I mean, we said this coming in, like, what is the number 66th fighter in the world doing fighting? Well, what Tapology has is the number 10 lightweight. And Oliveira looked good, long kicking stuff. Countered Gordon coming in. Did he slip a right hand and throw a right hook? It was nice. Whatever he did, he threaded the right hand through, hurt Gordon. Pivoted round, turning him and uppercutted him as he was sort of like stumbling. Beautiful stuff. I was hoping for a big submission because, I just love watching Charles Oliveira strangle people. But he's in a really weird spot because, like, It's like you can't say, just on Reddit someone was like, hey, Charles Oliveira is pretty good, and put up a list of his most recent streak. And it's wins over good guys by finish, and other people are like, yeah, but he loses against blah, blah, blah. And you're like, so he's still finishing very good lightweights, which is hard to do with the kind of consistency that he does. Going back to that Paul Felder loss, he's now on a 6-fight winning streak, 6-fight finish streak, guillotine Clay Guida. Rear naked choked Christoph Giagos. Rear naked choked Jim Miller, where he picked him up like a baby. That was incredible. Anaconda choked David Tamer in a foul-laden fight. And then beat up Nick Lentz for the 3rd time in his career. And then just most recently beat Jared Gordon. So it's like, get him back in there with a top lightweight. Put him in with Beneil Dariush. That'd be great. 2 guys who love to bang and have developed a good acumen on the feet, despite being mainly submission artists. Then you had Francisco Trinaldo versus Bobby Green. I mean, that was a fun enough fight. Francisco Trinaldo, just one of my boys through and through. Old, incredibly old southpaw. Good at stopping takedowns and muscling people around from the clinch, but has really picked up the striking in recent years. Like, not a big volume striker, but really good at timing people. So he'll just, sit back, let you step in, and then he'll crack you over the top with a booming left hand. Or time you coming in with a knee, as he did to Evan Dunham out of nowhere. Dropped Kevin Lee with was it a counter left uppercut to the body as he came in? Like, hit him right in the solar plexus, just turned him fetal. Because, I was going to say the body shots are the only thing that turn hardened fighters fetal, but, or only legal thing that turn hardened fighters fetal. But if you watched the Bare Knuckle FC fight rematch between Jason Knight and Artem Lobov, this week, days after Jason Knight was caught on video banging out 2 men in a toilet stall. But Jason Knight hits him with a jab or something in the 5th and final round, and Lobov just collapses in pain, gets up and his eyes basically exploded. Like, orbital fractures are another one that just make hardened badasses turn fetal. Crow Cop had a couple of them, actually. He broke Bob Sapp's eye. Bob Sapp. Well, that was when Bob Sapp was still scary. But he did the same to Josh Barnett. Did it on the ground. Josh Barnett tapped out in that one. Did Sakuraba suffer a broken orbital in their fight? I can't remember. But yeah, that's a bad one. But body shots, that's how you get people to go fetal. Bobby Green in this fight against Trinaldo was doing his usual thing, rolling off shots, feinting lots, and then very rarely actually committing to attacks of his own. I mean, he's been retired since 2 years ago, last year, whenever. But Bobby Green, he had so much hype when he beat Josh Thompson in the UFC back in 2014. Hey, good guess, it was 2014. And then he just hundreds of cancelled fights and then half a dozen losses since then. That's it. The only win over Eric Koch. And he's always showboating and mean mugging too, and you're just win a fight. That's all you need to do, and then we'll start taking that seriously. But it gets really frustrating. I can't remember who it was worst against. It was pretty bad against Josh Thompson when he won, but he's doing against Dustin Poirier, but got laid out. But just rolling with punches or whatever, and then dusting his shoulders off, or shaking his head, or wagging his finger, or something like that. And you're like, no, that's when you should be fucking counter-punching. That's the point of shoulder rolls. Yeah, very frustrating fighter to watch. But he did hit some nice takedowns in this fight, and there was a really nice switch. And I think it was guillotine to switch. It's that old combination again. You guillotine the guy, he's going to probably keep his body lock around you because he doesn't want to give you space to pummel in front of the shoulder and do an arm-out guillotine, a true guillotine. And so instead he just swings his arm over and hits the switch and turns him around and gets in on his legs. It was lovely stuff. Trinaldo was using both of them were actually using the Kimura pretty interestingly on the ground. But yeah, I mean, that was probably about the best fight on the card, which says a lot because it wasn't amazing. It was just serviceable. I think if I was doing star ratings, I think pretty much every fight on this card except Trinaldo and Oliveira's fights would get 1 star, 2 stars, tops. I think the 3-star fight is this, and that's the best you're getting on this card. Maybe 2.5 even, because that would be strictly average. And then the final tragedy, Shogun versus Paul Craig. Paul Craig was sent in there to lose. You know that. You know that Paul Craig's going to sit on the bottom. Mauricio Hua cut his teeth as a great ground and pounder. A lot of people were like, oh, he's an amazing striker in Pride. If you watch him in Pride, he was not a very crisp or slick striker. He was very good at hitting people on the ground. But also, Shogun's thing is stepping left hooks, shifting left hooks on the feet, and not using his low kicks, and timing overhands across the top of the jab, cross counters. So all of this, perfect for knocking out Paul Craig, who has basically no hands, but will still engage you on the feet, and doesn't really finish his takedowns a lot. And when he doesn't finish his takedowns, he pulls guard, where Mauricio, who a legendary ground and pounder, should be able to murder him. Didn't work out like that. Paul Craig actually came out and beat the brakes off Shogun in the first round. Savagely beat him. He was going left, right, as Shogun covered up. And Shogun was trying to do his double forearms guard that we talked about the other day. And Paul Craig, instead of throwing like right, straight, left hook, was throwing right, straight, left, straight. And the straight was coming up the center and just smashing Shogun's face open. Shogun's face after this fight was a bloody mess. And then he was on top in the second and third round, so a lot of people were like, well, he should have won, even though he did nothing on top. He very slowly stood up and then came down with diving punches that always missed. And if you compare that to the one that put out Alistair Overeem, where almost invariably, if you watched it, you didn't know what actually happened because it was so quick, and then they showed the replay and you went, fucking hell, that was quick. This was just tragic. Paul Craig even hit a couple of nice attempts at scissor sweeps, and he does, you do not see the scissor sweep in jiu-jitsu or no-gi even. You never see it in MMA. The closest I've seen was like Scott Jorgensen versus, I think Carlos Newton might have done it back in the day, but Scott Jorgensen versus Jeff Curran. Jeff Curran scissor swept him briefly. But Paul Craig does that. He scissor sweeps people for an instant, and then they come up and either wraps their head or goes for the triangle. Did it to Kennedy, whatever his name is. But unfortunately couldn't catch anything on Shogun. But yeah, never in trouble. Don't know why he went to the ground in the second and third rounds, because Shogun hadn't really hit him with anything good until the third round, late in the third round, when Paul Craig stood up and tried to take him down. Yeah, real shame. I mean, Paul Craig did the work in that fight, but you can understand why the decisions came in as a draw. Or even Shogun winning, because he held him, he was in top position for 2 rounds, even if he was ineffective from there. So that's those fights. They fucking sucked. What else did I watch this weekend? I watched a large number of fights to try and make up for this just shit card. I watched some of the one. I haven't watched all of it yet. I want to watch the main event between Elias Enahachi and Wenfeng Wang. Good name. But Elias Enahachi has a really interesting style. He's a southpaw, and he throws combinations and ends his combinations with a lead leg high kick. Just like a little snappy taekwondo-y sort of thing. But he closes the door with it every single time, and it's really cool. But he won the split decision in that, defending his title, so I need to watch that. But I did watch Yodson Klai, Fairtex, Iwai, Fairtex, whatever he is. Yod, you should know Yod. I mean, he's been unbeaten in Muay Thai for 10 years. Was surprised by Sami Sana in the kickboxing tournament. But he was fighting this Russian guy who doesn't have a Wikipedia page, doesn't have a Tapology page even, it doesn't look like, called Jamal Yusupov. And someone hit me up being like, Jamal, thought he'd be a black guy. Guy was Russian as shit. Dicey. That joke is so good for MMA, because everyone has a stupid name that doesn't sound like what they actually look like, so you can just flip it around. Oh, it's so good. Probably the best thing Brendan Schaub's team of writers ever wrote. God, I hope it's not a team. That would be tragic if multiple people were responsible for these jokes. But Jamal Yusupov, really surprised me. He was really good. I was watching it and a lot of people were, oh, well, obviously Yod slowed down, blah, 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 blah. But I was watching this and going, fucking hell, Yusupov, Jamal, man, my man, you're good. His jab, he was a fellow southpaw with Yodson Klai, so that takes away some of Yodson Klai's wicked body kicking with his left leg, and he likes to kick the open side arm as well. So he took that away a little bit, and then he just jabbed him up. And obviously the smaller gloves are a big deal when you're trying to jab in a kickboxing format. And his jab was working marvelously. And then in the second round, he comes out, flicks the jab in Yod's face, and then he throws, as a standalone combination, he starts with the left straight, and he dings Yod on the top of the head, and it doesn't look like it bothers Yod that much. But he finishes it with the jab again, just snaps it out there, and the snap of the jab just seems to, accumulate with the left hand and put Yod on wobbly legs. And then he finishes him with a left hook, a right hook, a left hook, and then right jab up the center again. Like the jab in the middle of his combinations, or to end his combinations, really seemed to be bothering Yod a lot. So he knocked him down and out. Knocked him down twice and got the knockout in the second round. Very early in the second round, under a minute. If you haven't seen that, go watch it, because it's just a really good showing from that lad. Jamal Yusupov versus Yodson Klai. It's on there. It's on One's YouTube channel. And then I popped into Bellator to see the main event of that one. There was talk of a work going on Bellator, and I have watched through the prelims and the main card, and I can't find the fight, which was billed highly in the on the poster, because it was an Israeli lad against some Palestinian. No, it was an Israeli lad fighting locally, so obviously it's like Bellator does their thing where they have a local main event and then the actual main event. They're like, these rubes are here to see Paul Daly, but we know the real main event is Gegard Mousasi versus Rafael Lovato, which we'll put on at 4 a.m. or whatever. But what I did see was Linton Vassell versus Sergei Haritonov. And wouldn't you know it, Sergei Haritonov still can't check kicks, and when he's on the bottom, he can't defend himself. Vassell got on top of him, beat him up, and that was about it. Yeah, beat him up with low kicks on the way in, jabbed him through left straights. Vassell's head is always up in the air when he's punching. I was very worried for him when he was stepping in on Sergei. But yeah, took him down. Really strong. You know, he's gone up to heavyweight from light heavyweight, but Chael Sonnen was saying that Neil Melanson said he was the strongest guy he's ever worked with, which is incredible when you consider all the guys that Neil Melanson's worked with Rumble, so that's pretty crazy. But actually, that's something I did enjoy. Bellator put Chael in the booth with Big John and Goldie, and I didn't notice it being good, but I forgot that it's the worst booth in the world. I just sort of forgot it was going on. So yeah, I mean, he took my advice, which is great, because I'm normally right about these things, but they did manage to fuck it up in another way, because I got to see the first time I've seen this at local events. I've never seen this at a proper, a proper organization. Linton Vassell's glove came open. The Velcro strap on his glove was free as he was hitting Sergei Haritonov from the top to finish the fight, which shouldn't happen, because if you remember in the UFC, they tape your gloves, and I believe that's because of the Las Vegas connection, and Nevada is very strict about taping of gloves, because basically it's a boxing holdover. Once you've wrapped the fighter's hands and you have someone from your team go to the other team's locker room to watch them wrap the hands so that you're comfortable with it, and you also have officials there watching them wrap the hands so that you can't plaster of Paris your fucking hand wraps, but they watch you wrap your hands. Then you put the glove on, and they tape the bottom of the glove on, and then the referee normally signs over multiple folds of the tape so that if it's tampered with, the signature will be broken and you'll know. Or traditionally, at least, that was the case. Boxing, obviously, you can watch a boxing match and they still tape all the gloves. UFC, you watch them tape the gloves, because every time at the end of the fight, when they want to take their gloves off, it's a big thing. It's like, get these fucking gloves off me, and it takes forever. I don't know why Linton Vassell's gloves weren't taped. I'm not accusing him of cheating. It's pretty fucking rinky-tink to turn up in Israel where they don't have a commission and be like, we won't even bother taping the gloves down. Very strange. First time I've ever seen that in like a big fight, as in a big promotions fights. Right, let's do some questions, because I want to wash the taste of that card out of my mouth. I got Brazil card breath. Subject, Ultimate Warwalk versus Ultimate Warwalk Killer. Jack, how would Robert Whittaker's crisp stand-up skills compare against Habib if they met at a catch weight? Thanks, from Landon. That's quite a big weight discrepancy you got there. Whittaker versus Habib. But I would be interested in Whittaker versus Usman. That'd be a good one. If you did it at like 175 or 180, that would be a really interesting fight, because you've got a guy who just wants to lean on the fence, and you've got a guy who's really good at getting up off the fence and seemingly at breaking away. I haven't seen Whittaker held down, but again, against like Jacare and Yoel Romero, they were just trying to take him down and hold him down. They weren't really bothered about just leaning on him on the fence and pulling him down again. Mind you, Jacare just had a fight with Blachowicz where he just leaned on him over and over again. I think stand-up wise, Whittaker would probably beat Usman to death. But I don't know, because Usman's stand-up is serviceable and it does its job because he just stays in your face and tries to lean on you. Habib is a little bit more, big bomb, run in, swinging, jump in with lead uppercut or whatever. He does jab from time to time. He fought Alayakinta, so he got a chance to show off his jab. But a lot of his striking is sort of like pull his head back and then swing. I think it'd be very interesting to watch him in against a good kicker if they could get comfortable kicking. I mean, I said last week Conor McGregor landed a couple of good kicks when he managed to back Habib up. I just don't really know what to tell you about that because, I don't know how Robert Whittaker's style of wall walk, where he gets to one knee with the low knee, the knee that's down is pressed against the fence, his shoulders against the fence. He's basically giving up the back body lock, which is Habib's position, and then getting up and turning into the opponent by putting his elbow in almost behind him and then turning it into an underhook as he turns around. I don't think I've seen anyone try that against Habib, but again, Habib's goal is to get to the back body lock, so it'd be very interesting to see how that worked out. I mean, if you watched when Yoel Romero got the back body lock on Whittaker, he was doing sit-outs and chaining moves together and really moving well for a guy that size. Or anyone, basically, in MMA. You see guys attempt one thing and they go, fuck. It just to keep going at that pace when someone's in such a dominant position. Well, not dominant, but, controlling position. You don't see it a lot, but yeah, I'd be interested in that. Oi, Jackie Slacky. Is there any chance that we might see some articles on catch as catch can in the future? It's not a style you hear about a lot, but it still shows up and proves very effective from time to time in the history of fighting. You have written some remarkable pieces on the history of boxing, and it would be fun to read some on the history of grappling as well. Either way, you're a top bloke. Cheers from Emil. Yeah, catch is fascinating. I think the thing about catch is that, it's a bit of a joke in the grappling community that catch wrestlers are Josh Barnett, that other huge guy who I can't remember, and a bunch of fat dudes in sweatpants who just love talking about history. It's a style. Basically, catch wrestling was a style of wrestling that has fallen out of favor because there aren't really catch wrestling. Well, they're trying to bring them back, but it's not the mode of competition now, so it's not really a thing anymore. Some of the famous catch wrestlers, you got Josh Barnett, who calls himself a catch wrestler, but people like Sakuraba actually trained with Billy Robinson. But he also had a wrestling background before that, an amateur wrestling background. He trained with Billy Robinson when he went to become a professional wrestler, because back in the day, Japan thought that you should train with actual accomplished catch wrestlers. Like Karl Gotch was over there, and he trained Funaki, Inoki first, and Funaki and Suzuki. But again, Suzuki already had a wrestling background. He tried out for the Olympics for freestyle wrestling. Catch can wrestling is fascinating because we joke so much about British wrestling, but it was a really big thing in Wigan. And if you hear Billy Robinson talk about it, sadly he's passed away now, and I never actually got to meet him or train with him or pick his brain, which I really wanted to do. I think he was teaching out in Utah in the end, which is a really strange place for him to end up. But he grew up in Wigan, trained with Billy Riley, who was one of the, who I believe was the founder of the Snake Pit, or at least the owner at the time that Billy Robinson was there. And basically, the picture he paints is that it was basically because there was nothing else going on. There was nothing for kids to do, so they'd go and get the shit kicked out of them wrestling. And he basically just said that you wouldn't do it today, and they had horse hair mats and shit. But the Snake Pit produced some seriously good wrestlers, and all the sort of good developments in martial arts. Through the years, Catch as Catch Can was an amalgamation. It's guys developing stuff to the rule set, but it's also, particularly after the war, they had guys go out to, they had guys either stationed or or living with Indians, so they brought back some Kushti stuff, and Billy Robinson contested that it was kind of like the early days of jiu-jitsu. You bring in other stuff if it works, and then Robinson obviously ended up going around the world and wrestling various world champions from other places anyway. But it's really interesting, considering how rule sets affect the play of sports, because obviously you can't, I think they call it a leg scissors or whatever in catch, but the guard position doesn't really exist if you can just push someone's shoulders to the mat with your hands. But a lot of things in catch wrestling, and traditional wrestling before the rules prohibited it, you'd have holds that elicit pain or threaten to damage a joint so that the opponent turns or moves. Like the Gotch toe hold is a very famous, I suppose you'd call it a submission, but it is a twisting of the foot to get the opponent to turn onto their back. And that's Frank Gotch, an American wrestler. But things like the Grobbit were big in Wigan, which is you'd call it a front face lock now, I suppose. Well, in pro wrestling they call it a front face lock, but it's a neck crank. It's basically like you put your hand under the opponent's face, like from the turtle to start a guillotine, but you deliberately turn their head and have the forearm on their cheek instead of getting their throat, and then you lock your hands and you can bend their neck sideways, basically, and make them turn or do significant damage. But it's crazy because that's not legal in most jiu-jitsu and modern grappling things. But if you went to Wigan in those days and you tried to choke someone, they'd lose their mind at you. We're very cool with being choked nowadays, but if you neck crank someone, we lose our shit. And one of the interesting things that came from the catch wrestling is like Sakuraba's double wrist lock and working from I suppose you call it the turtle, but the turtle and the wrestler's base, working between up on the hands and down on the head and knees. And in jiu-jitsu, like, there was never any point doing that. Like, it was, you ground me back to guard or whatever. But by doing that, Sakuraba beat Paul Gracie's, and almost beat Halleck despite being like 50 years old. I believe the Snake Pit's actually still there. It's run by a guy called Roy Wood, who was one of the last students to come through under Billy Riley, I believe. And Tommy Hayes is still around too. Both of those guys are like the last of the old timers. And during the London 2012 Olympics, some of the wrestlers over for the Olympics trained up there to stay ready. So yeah, I mean, it's got an interesting history, and it is sort of dead now. I like that they're trying to bring back the tournaments, like the competition style, because I think that's the best way to bring it back. At the moment, it's sort of like it's kind of like HEMA. I'm not going to pick on HEMA people because I think it's pretty cool being into the history of fighting techniques as I am. But I think that's part of like what catch wrestling is now. I think it's dudes who are interested in the history, and there are some people who are like, I just like it because it's an alternative to Gracie Jiu-Jitsu or grappling or whatever. I think grappling is just grappling, but I think if you can reestablish that style of competition, I think that style of training will probably take off a bit more and give some relevance to some of the old techniques. Alternatively, like we're always saying on this podcast, when I was saying like the two styles of karate competition, and I was saying you should just take those and use those as training tools. You could just take the catch wrestling rule set and use it to develop the kind of refusal to go to your back that you probably want in MMA, building up from the knees and looking for Kimuras and shit on the way up. One day I'll do some history stuff about it, but I want to get down to Wigan at some point first and pick some brains and check out what is now the Snake Pit. Jack, did you see Ross Pearson getting knocked out with a rolling thunder kick recently? Jesus fucking Christ. Your boy forever Stefan, brackets not Struve. Yeah, this was heartbreaking. I will say, though, that it was one of the best rolling thunders I've ever seen. Like, it was gorgeous. Or a Domo Oshigeri, if you're that way inclined. If you're of the weeb persuasion. Gorgeous. Like, the leg went high over and the leg kicked down. It wasn't just a dude throwing himself through the air. Really nice. Reminded me a lot of David Kiria does those from time to time, but really you only see ones like that nice in Kyokushin. And it just shows like the guy he was fighting was not on his level. I'm sure that Ross, like as much as Ross is past his best, he was still having decently competitive fights with lower end UFC lightweights. But you can't really prepare yourself for kicks like that. Dudes don't really do them. Ahoy, Jack! I've got a question about Habib's wrestling. Oh, more Habib. How high level a wrestler will a fighter need to be for you to pick them to be able to shut down Habib? Tony Ferguson was an NCAA national champion, but Abel Trujillo was an NAIA All-American. I'm mainly interested in Gaethje and Gillespie for this reason. With the former being a D1 All-American and the latter being a D1 champion, either one of them would be by far the most accomplished wrestler that Habib will have ever fought. I kind of have this suspicion Habib might be like a Damian Maia case, where he looks utterly unstoppable against fighters up to a certain level of wrestling, but then gets shut down against top-shelf competitors. Maia ragdolled Story and Fitch, and they're as good of wrestlers as anyone Habib beat. But when he went up against Woodley, Covington, and Usman, he just couldn't get anything going. Many thanks and good wishes to you, Michael from Minnesota. I think we've got to stop looking at wrestling like that. I think you've got to remember this is MMA wrestling. I mean, it's cliche now, but there is a huge fucking difference. And I say that like having just spent time watching, some of my favorite wrestlers to watch are like John Smith, David Taylor, guys who are snapping heads and looking for ankle picks and shit like that. Stuff that doesn't exist in MMA. I think you can get to certainly if you brought a prime John Smith or David Taylor or someone like that over to MMA, they would have some amazing skills to start working off. But the game is so different. A high level wrestling match is so different from an MMA match that you can't be using that as your way to level people's wrestling. Because even if you're like not talking about guys who are like looking for ankles and shit like that you just don't see in MMA, the hand fight and the tie-ups just aren't there. It's not that game. If you watch the really good wrestlers, they're the ones who are really good at the hand fights, the tie-ups, the feints, the ways to get in, because that's the hard part, because you're looking at the other guy and he's going, I'm going to take you down, but you're going to take me down, or how do I get in there? Whereas in MMA, you have to do that with strikes, and the other guy's going to be trying to take your head off when you do, and you have to contend with being kicked in the leg and stuff on the outside. So I think it's very dangerous to get drawn into the idea that the level of wrestling is in, or the level of a person's ability to stop Habib from taking them down, specifically in MMA, is anything to do with their what national championships they've won. Because further to that, like there are guys who didn't win the D1 championship or came in second or went out or just never got the chance who have gone on to be amazing MMA wrestlers. And let's not forget, like, the best anti-wrestler perhaps in MMA history, Jose Aldo, has no formal wrestling background. He didn't come through any school. He didn't go through the tournaments. He wasn't meeting other great wrestlers. He learned his wrestling, stopping takedowns from MMA fighters. And then he was so good at it that he could stop the best wrestlers in MMA from taking him down. And with all that being said, like, Conor McGregor sprawled on Habib in the third round. Was it third round, fourth round, when he was backing him up, had Habib's back to the fence. Habib was shooting into the center of the cage. McGregor sprawled on him and shook him off. Like, it was the one takedown that he stopped, but by putting Habib on the fence and having all that space to go back into, I think the problem with Habib is guys getting stuck on the fence because he's so good on the fence. And I think that that's, obviously, that is another part that just doesn't exist in any of those wrestling competitions that were just, those guys who won all those accolades. The fence wrestling doesn't exist there. It is a completely different game. I would say stop looking at wrestling titles like that. Look at them as like an indication of someone's potential. If you're looking at prospects for MMA, which is what Scott Coker and Bellator are doing. They're going, oh, you've won a D1 championship. How would you like to get into MMA? That's a good way to find talent and then hone them into an MMA mold as they come up through the ranks. But good fighters working out Habib's habits and trying to stop them is what's going to stop him. It's not anything to do with like just how good a title you won when you were at high school or whatever. And if anything, like, you said being happy to bet on someone against Habib or being able to shut him down. If anything, like, Tony Ferguson is one of my most anticipated fights against Habib, not because of his wrestling, but because of all his skills. The guard game, like, who else is operating on that level from I hate fucking levels, but who else do you see operating that comfortably and constantly and aggressively from the bottom and, and having wrestling as well? They're just, it's complete skill sets we're interested in. It's not so much just train your sprawl. We were talking about 6 months of sprawl training with Robin van Roosmalen, but it's way more complicated. Cheers, Michael. Right, I reckon that'll do us for today. We'll be back later in the week. There's a One event and a Bellator event. Bellator London. MVP's got a new last-minute appointment. I can't wait to moan about this. But we'll do that on Thursday. If you want to get in on the Patreon, it keeps me doing these 2 episodes a week. And also, we got a ring-cutting piece going up later today. And the Leduc study, it will be going up soon. So sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonbypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing at any time, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy, Jack Slack. Let's never speak of this card again.